we can't put people in boxes.
I know.
There's different things out
Yeah.
there for different people and different personalities.
You know, I have come across people who have undergone, you know, one particular type of treatment and they feel like it's failed or they failed if it hasn't worked for them. Am I just too unfixable?
I think that's one of the really fascinating, beautiful things about the brain is the fact that it can repair itself. It can rewire itself. I think it's like 86 million neurons firing in our brain. And we have the ability to light up new pathways by doing things like going to therapy, exercising, having social experiences, this successful healing process and fixed.
Yeah, we've gone through some really difficult times. We want to know that the likelihood of us experiencing this again, we don't want to feel the impact of that again. We don't necessarily want to go through it. So let's start with unpacking our first dilemma.
Let's go.
Today. Okay. So our first dilemma comes from a male in his 40s, and he says there are a lot of tools and suggestions on how to deal with childhood traumas, etc. But how does one know when one has overcome these traumas? i.e., what are the signs to look out for once we have been successful in rewiring the subconscious brain? Good question.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I actually think there's two parts to what this guy is actually saying. I think the first part is there's an understanding of maybe something quite scientific that's measurable. Like, how do I know when? I think what he's actually saying is, how do I know when I'm feeling better? When maybe my symptoms of trauma are not in control of me and I feel more in control of them. And I wonder if it actually might be quite helpful to talk about what trauma looks like.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah? So when we think of trauma, you know, that word gets used, I think, quite a lot at the moment. But maybe if we understand it from the way we're trained, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and understanding it as part of the anxiety family.
Yeah.
And what we tend to see with clients and with people that are presenting with this condition is they're going to feel very, very overwhelmed. They're going to really struggle to regulate their emotions. They're going to feel quite numb. They're going to suffer with a lot of flashbacks, a lot of nightmares, carry a lot of tension in their body. There are things like their concentration is going to really decrease. Their memory recall is going to go downhill. So we tend to see a lot that you know, their long-term and their short-term memory gets really, really impacted by it. And then I think we can further describe it, you know, take it that one step further, which is complex trauma, which I don't think gets that much light on it. You know, you often hear PTSD, but complex trauma is also part of that family.
Yeah, and that may be what he's alluding to because he said childhood traumas, etc. So, I mean, so complex trauma or complex PTSD can really arise as a result of, you know, childhood abuse or neglect or abandonment. It can arise from, you know, witnessing or experiencing yourself domestic violence. It can arise if you have been unfortunate to have been, you know, manipulated or forced into things like prostitution, slavery. Prisoners of war can experience this. So I think there is that element of it being just deeply impactful to one's sense of self, because some of the symptoms can look like feelings of worthlessness and shame, emotional dysregulation, really difficulty forming trust in relationships, so difficulty forming and maintaining relationships. It can look like emotional flashbacks. So it can be really impactful to one's sense of self and their experience of everyday life. So I get why, you know, this is really important for this individual to understand or to know what are the markers that I've actually moved on, that I'm dealing with this, that I'm healing and I'm moving on. And maybe we can also speak about the treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he said there's lots of skills and techniques out there. So it might be if people are thinking, oh, this might be something I'm struggling with.
Yeah.
You know, what can I do to help myself? Or what can I go and ask my GP for? Or if I'm searching for a therapist, what can I look for?
Yeah. So the good thing is there isn't one, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but maybe it just is what it is.
I think it's a good thing because do you know what I really like about psychology and psychotherapy and therapy and counselling and all that, everything that falls under this umbrella, is that we can't put people in boxes.
I know, yeah.
So actually, when you said that, I was like, I like that there's different things out there for different people and different personalities.
You know what, you're right, because I think, you know, I have come across people who have undergone, you know, one particular type of treatment and they feel like it's failed or they failed if it hasn't worked for them. And then, you know, they're thinking, gosh, like, is it me? Am I just too unfixable? So yeah, I think it is good that there are different approaches that we can take. So one approach is trauma-informed cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. That can be really effective. And EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
There's a tongue twister, that one.
I always forget what the EMDR stands for. So I said it. Okay, so EMDR is also really highly effective for trauma and also complex trauma.
And really what all of these treatments are doing, the best way I really like to describe it is, you know, imagine your traumatic experiences, you know, like this fellow was talking about, like whatever he's experienced in his childhood, maybe before he sought treatment, I want you to imagine it like a linen cupboard in your home, like an airing cupboard. And it's, you know, all your towels, all your sheets, your pillows, your extra duvets, all of that's in there. And when you walk past this cupboard, the doors, they just go whoosh, they fling open. Everything comes out.
Yeah.
And what, you know, when you are in that heightened sense and you're not able to deal with it, you're feeling very out of control, your emotions are on top of you, you're feeling so overwhelmed you can't think, you know, you just react. And the reaction is scramble, 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 pick everything up, chuck it back in, shut the doors and just keep going until it happens again, and then it happens again. But what these treatments, what they do is in a very safe, very slow and a very protected way, what your therapist would be helping you to do is to open those doors, take out each individual item, be it those memories, learn to look at them safely and then fold them away and neatly put them back in their place where they belong. And that really gives the person a sense of autonomy and control. So when this guy here is saying, you know, how do I know that I'm doing better? It's when you feel in control. And I think the thing with trauma is, you know, when I speak to clients that have experienced trauma, and when we have come through part of it or the other side of it, and I want to come on to this and this idea about healing, but just more like coming through part of it or the other side of it. You know, one thing I hear time and time again, acceptance is a huge thing. And not acceptance that it's okay what happened, but acceptance from a perspective of, I accept this as a part of my story and I'm back in control of that, because trauma is about being out of control. You are never in control of what happened to you. And that is what was so scary and threatening and terrifying. So it's taking that control back. And I think that's a huge part of the acceptance process.
And taking it back in a way that is actually conducive and effective. Because for some people, taking control back may look like, right, I'm just not going to trust anyone again. If I've been let down in my relationships, if I've had people that have, you know, the people that were supposed to be caring for me the most and looking after me have neglected me or abused me, what more other people? So therefore, I'm not going to trust anyone. I'm going to be independent. I'm going to, you know, depend on myself. So I think it's helpful to also think about how one healthily gets control back and what that could look like. Or, for example, control could look like, right, you know, I experienced a really distressing motorbike accident. So therefore, I'm never going to ride a motorbike, or I'm never going to get in a car. Or, do you know what I mean? So I think, how we gain that control back can be really helpful or unhelpful.
And that's where I think therapy can be really helpful, is when you have that trusting relationship with your therapist, that hopefully as they get to understand you and your coping mechanisms, the behaviors that you're engaging with, that they can challenge that in a way that's therapeutic, obviously. But as you said, to be able to say, well, you not getting back on that motorbike or you not getting back on that in the car, is that helping you or is that hindering you? And looking at what's become protective in a healthy way and what's become maybe an unhealthy coping mechanism as a response to what's happened. Because that's, it's quite a normal process for us to form these coping mechanisms when things happen to us.
Right, it's a way of protecting ourselves.
This is it.
It's a method of survival. But there comes a point where actually we need to stop surviving and we actually need to start living or thriving, as people say. And there comes a point where that protection is no longer needed in that way. So it's better to actually change that and to adapt rather than to keep plugging ahead and forging ahead with the same method or mode of protection, self-protection.
Yeah. And I really like what you said there about adapting, because it is an adaptive response where you can then adapt again. And I think, this is what he was talking about, this idea of how do I know that I've rewired my brain. I think what he's actually talking about there is this idea of neuroplasticity. So if you haven't, heard of that before, what that really means is when we experience trauma, our brains start to change configuration. So what we start to see in our brain is, very long-term impact of trauma can have structural changes. So the size of our hippocampus, where like memory is stored, starts to decrease. We are going to be using the more emotional part of our brain, which is the amygdala, the place in our brain where we really use rational thinking, the prefrontal cortex, that starts to get used less. And so that's going to have an impact on how we are thinking, how we are processing emotions, and then how we're going to behave. I think that's one of the really fascinating and beautiful things about the brain, is the fact that it can repair itself, it can rewire itself. We have something like, I think it's like 86 million neurons firing in our brain, and we have the ability to light up new pathways by doing things like going to therapy, exercising, having social experiences, having a positive environment around us is going to fire up these neurons and create these new pathways in our brain. So the more we do it, the more we're going to rewire, and the stronger those those connections, those experiences, those grooves between the neurons are going to have on us and are going to form. And so that's one part of, what he's saying about successfully rewiring the brain. But then that's another little nuance that I picked up on. And I think you did as well, this idea of this successful healing process. I'm healed.
Yeah.
I'm cured. I'm fixed.
Yeah, this idea of healing and becoming fixed, it makes sense, because when we have experienced brokenness, and we really felt like, we've gone through some really difficult times, we want to know that the likelihood of us experiencing this again, the likelihood of us experiencing distressing things again, traumatic things again, we don't want to feel the impact of that again. We don't necessarily want to go through it. But I would say that despite how distressing these experiences can be, and I'm not trying to minimize or say that it's a good thing that difficult and painful things happen to us. However, at the same time, I think they do contribute to our story. They don't have to be our full and complete story, but I don't think that by taking them out, it makes our story any better. I actually think that the concept of like post-traumatic growth, the story that you tell yourself, the meaning, the resilience, how you use it to set yourself up for further success in life, can be so important. So yes, you don't necessarily want to have the remnants of these symptoms interfering with your everyday life and stopping you from having like a fulfilling life. But I also think that to be healed doesn't mean that we forget. It doesn't mean that we eradicate certain things that have happened to us. I think that they help to inform our story, and our stories can carry so much power, so much meaning. It's just how we look at it, and we can use it to kind of springboard us into other experiences and into life.
Definitely. I think our stories shape us.
Yeah.
And I'm not the biggest fan of words like pure and fixed and healed. I think healing, yes, we are all on a healing process.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the key word here, process. Like this is this thing that we're calling life, what we're all living every day, it's a process. So when somebody says to me, you know, when will I be fixed, or when will I have completely rewired the brain, or when will I stop doing this? I don't think we ever do, you know, until the day we cease to exist. I really don't think that we do, because firstly, you know, you're not going to wipe out these memories within you, or these reflexes that you have within your mind, your body, your brain. You're not going to wipe those out. So, you know, I often say to my clients, imagine, you know, you've been wearing, or you've been right-handed your whole life, and your left hand has been in a cast, and then I cut the cast off and I train you how to use your left hand, but then like out of nowhere I'm like, hey, catch, and you're gonna just go for your right hand again, because that's what you're, you know, you've got all that muscle memory there. So it's the same thing. I don't think we're ever going to erase that muscle memory, and that's, as you saying, it forms part of who we are. It forms part of our story, and the stories that we, you know, that we have are stories that we can share. And I think that's part of the beauty of vulnerability. Something a client actually said to me recently, and I did ask him if I could share this. He said to me, you know, what I've been through, I never thought I would go through. I never thought I would go through. And I've been very scared of my own vulnerability, of what I've been through. But in the last kind of 6 months, as he's been growing from this experience and has started to talk to people about it, I think he cited, I've shared this story with 50 people or something of that number, and each one of them has been a positive response. And I think connection is part of that healing process, the connection we get from being vulnerable with somebody, hearing someone's vulnerability, and having that empathic connection with them.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So I think to kind of like come full circle with this, I think well done on getting through some horrific experiences, childhood traumas. But I really want to come back to that linen cupboard example that you gave. How you may know that you are progressing and processing and moving on, moving through your experiences of trauma, that you can take out the pieces. There can be some order. The symptoms don't eclipse you, overwhelm you. They don't just pop out. There can be some order. There can be some control. There can be some understanding. So I think the symptoms reducing would be a good sign that you are moving forwards.
I think it's a really good indicator to know, and to check in with yourself. Maybe you know, I would, when somebody's finished therapy, I often say to them, hold that time, but maybe like on a monthly basis, where you're checking in with yourself. You know, use those parameters of where you were when you started therapy to where you are now, and just go back and check, like, how have I been this month? What have my symptoms looked like? How have I felt? What have I been thinking? What old behaviours have maybe creeped back up in, or what triggers are maybe still there? And it's a good way to stay on the process. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for sending us that question.
It was a really good one.
Yeah.
What have you learnt? Let us know in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe and follow us on our social channels.